My name is Wesley, and I am 55 years old. I was lying in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning when my daughter called me. It was Madison. She did not even ask how I was doing. She simply said she was getting married, that she had sold the apartment and the car, and goodbye. I did not panic. Instead, I smiled and told her she forgot one thing. She paused, confused. She asked what I meant. I laughed out loud because she had no idea. Have you ever been in a situation where someone thought they had outsmarted you, but they missed the most important detail? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. And if you want to find out what my daughter forgot, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay with me through this story. To understand why I laughed that night, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to 1996, when my whole world changed in ways I never expected. I was 26 years old when I married Diane. She was 25, with the kindest smile I had ever seen, and a heart that could warm the coldest room. We met at a church fundraiser in our small town in Ohio. She was serving lemonade, and I spilled mine all over my shirt trying to talk to her. She laughed, handed me a napkin, and said I was the clumsiest man she had ever met. I told her I would spend the rest of my life proving her right. She laughed again, and that was it. I knew I was going to marry her. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony with about 40 people. Her parents, my parents, a few cousins, and some friends from work. Nothing fancy, just love and promises under an old oak tree in her parents' backyard. Diane wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her petite frame. I wore a rented suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the look in her eyes when she said do. 9 months later, Madison was born. Our little miracle. Diane had a difficult pregnancy, but she pushed through every challenge with grace. When I held Madison for the first time in that hospital room, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer just Wesley the plumber who fixed pipes and unclogged drains. I was a father, and I swore right then and there that I would do everything in my power to give this little girl the best life possible. But life had other plans. 3 weeks after Madison was born, Diane developed complications. An infection that the doctors caught too late. I remember sitting in the waiting room holding Madison in my arms while the nurses rushed in and out of Diane's room. I remember praying harder than I had ever prayed in my life. I remember the doctor walking toward me with that look on his face, the look that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Diane passed away on a Tuesday afternoon. She was 25 years old. She had been a mother for exactly 21 days. I will not pretend that I handled it well. I did not. For weeks I could barely function. My mother came to stay with me helping with Madison, while I sat in the dark, staring at the walls, wondering how I was supposed to raise a daughter without her mother, wondering if I even wanted to keep going. But then, one night, Madison started crying. My mother was asleep, exhausted from days of taking care of both of us, so I dragged myself out of bed and went to the nursery. I picked up my daughter, held her against my chest, and felt her tiny fingers wrap around my thumb. She stopped crying almost immediately. She just looked up at me with those big eyes, Diane's eyes, and in that moment I knew I could not give up. I had to live. For her. From that day forward, I dedicated my entire existence to being the best father I could be. I worked 2 jobs for the first 10 years of Madison's life. During the day, I fixed pipes and installed water heaters. At night, I worked as a security guard at a warehouse on the edge of town. I slept an average of 4 hours a night, sometimes less. But I never complained. Every time I felt tired, I would think of Madison, and the exhaustion would fade. I learned how to do things I never imagined I would do. I learned how to cook simple meals, because I could not afford to eat out. Spaghetti with meat sauce became our Tuesday tradition, pancakes on Sunday mornings, grilled cheese sandwiches when money was tight, which was often. I learned how to braid hair by watching videos at the library during my lunch breaks. The first few times were disasters. Madison would look in the mirror and laugh at my crooked attempts. But I kept trying, and eventually I got good enough that other kids at school started asking who did her hair. I never missed a parent-teacher conference, not once in 12 years. Even when it meant losing a day's pay because my boss did not believe in time off for family matters. Even when it meant driving across town in a truck that barely ran because I could not afford to fix the transmission, I showed up. Every single time. Because Madison deserved to know that her father cared about her education, her future, her life. Our neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor, became like a grandmother to Madison. She was 70 years old when we moved next door to her, a widow whose children had moved to different states and rarely visited. She would watch Madison for me when my shifts overlapped, refusing any payment I offered. She said taking care of Madison gave her purpose. And I think it did. I saw the way her eyes lit up when Madison ran into her house after school, full of stories about her day. There is one memory that stays with me even now. Madison was 7 years old, and we were eating dinner together at our small kitchen table. Out of nowhere, she looked up at me and asked why she did not have a mommy like the other kids at school. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I set down my fork, took a deep breath, and told her about Diane. I told her about the lemonade and the wedding under the oak tree and how her mother loved her more than anything in the world. I told her that Diane was watching over us from heaven, proud of the little girl Madison was becoming. That night, after I tucked Madison into bed, I went to my room and cried. I had not cried since the funeral. But sitting there in the dark, I let it all out. The grief, the loneliness, the overwhelming weight of raising a child alone. I cried until there were no tears left. And then I washed my face, set my alarm for 5 in the morning, and went to sleep. Because Madison needed me to keep going, and I would never let her down. As Madison grew older, I started saving every penny I could. I wanted her to have opportunities I never had. I wanted her to go to college, to build a career, to never have to work 2 jobs just to survive. So I skipped buying new clothes for myself. I drove the same 1992 Ford Ranger for 15 years, even after the rust started eating through the doors. I packed my lunch every single day instead of buying food from the vending machines at work. When Madison got into a good high school, one that required tuition, I took out a loan. It was not a large loan, but for someone in my position, it felt enormous. I remember signing the papers with shaking hands, terrified of the debt, but even more terrified of denying my daughter a quality education. She did well. Madison was always smart, always driven. She graduated near the top of her class and got accepted into a state university in Columbus. I was so proud I could barely speak when she showed me the acceptance letter. I just hugged her and held on for a long time. To help pay for her college, I picked up a 3rd job. On weekends, I drove a delivery truck for a local furniture store. My body ached constantly. My knees hurt. My back hurt. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed. But I kept going, because every delivery I made was another step toward Madison's future. In 2018, Madison graduated from college with a degree in marketing. She was 22 years old, bright and ambitious, and ready to take on the world. I was 50 years old, worn down by decades of hard work. But I had never been happier. I had managed to save up $40,000 over the years. It was not much in the grand scheme of things, but it represented 20 years of sacrifice. 20 years of skipped meals and patched clothes and long nights. I used that money as a down payment on a small one-bedroom apartment in Columbus for Madison. The apartment cost $125,000. I took out a mortgage for the remaining $85,000, planning to pay it off slowly over the next 15 years. Here is the important part. I put the apartment in my name, not because I did not trust Madison, but because I wanted to teach her responsibility. The plan was simple. She would live there, build her career, and when she turned 30 and demonstrated financial stability, I would transfer the ownership to her. It was supposed to be a graduation gift that came with a lesson about earning things rather than expecting them. I also bought her a car, a used 2015 Honda Civic with 60,000 miles on it. Reliable, affordable, and practical. The car was also in my name for the same reasons as the apartment. Madison was thrilled. She hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. She promised she would make me proud, that she would work hard and pay me back for everything I had done for her. I told her she did not need to pay me back. I told her that seeing her happy and successful was all the payment I would ever need. Looking back, I wonder if I made a mistake. Not in buying the apartment or the car, but in giving her so much without making sure she truly understood the value of it. Maybe I should have let her struggle more. Maybe I should have made her earn her own way from the beginning. But I was a father who had lost his wife and raised his daughter alone for 22 years. I wanted to give her everything I never had. I wanted to protect her from hardship. I did not realize that sometimes hardship is the best teacher. As I sat in that hospital bed years later, listening to my daughter tell me she had sold everything and was leaving, I thought about those early days. I thought about the tiny apartment we lived in when she was a baby. I thought about the nights I stayed up rocking her to sleep while Diane's absence hung heavy in the air. I thought about all the sacrifices, all the love, all the hope I had poured into raising her. And I wondered where it all went wrong. Madison got her first real job about 6 months after graduation, a marketing position at a large company in Columbus. The starting salary was $48,000 a year, which seemed like a fortune to her. She called me the day she got the offer, her voice bubbling with excitement. I congratulated her, told her I was proud, and reminded her to save money for the future. She laughed and said I worried too much. The first year went well. Madison was diligent, ambitious, and eager to prove herself. She called me every Sunday evening, and we would talk for half an hour or more about her week, her projects, her coworkers. I looked forward to those calls more than she probably knew. They were my connection to her new life, my window into the world she was building for herself. But somewhere around the second year, things began to change. Madison started calling less frequently. Our weekly conversations became bi-weekly, then monthly. When we did talk, she seemed distracted, rushing through our conversations, as if she had somewhere more important to be. I told myself she was just busy with work. Young people have demanding careers these days. I understood that. But there was something else, something I could not quite identify. A distance in her voice that had not been there before. I learned later that Madison's workplace was filled with people from wealthy backgrounds. Young professionals who drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes and took vacations to places I had only seen in magazines. Madison, with her used Honda Civic and her modest apartment, began to feel out of place. She started to see her upbringing as something to be ashamed of, rather than something to be proud of. She began lying about her background. When coworkers asked about her family, she told them her father was a businessman, not a plumber, not a man who spent his life crawling under houses and fixing leaky pipes. A businessman. The word stung when I eventually heard about it, but I tried not to take it personally. Madison was young, navigating a world that valued appearance over substance. I hoped she would grow out of it. Then she met Victor. Victor Harrington. Even now, typing that name makes my stomach turn. He was 34 years old when Madison introduced him to me over a video call. Tall, with neatly styled brown hair, and the kind of confident smile that seemed practiced in a mirror. He wore an expensive suit and spoke with the smooth assurance of a man who had never been told no in his life. Madison was 26 at the time, and she was clearly smitten. She could not stop smiling during our call, looking at Victor like he hung the moon and stars just for her. He called himself a real estate investor, said he had properties all over the country, deals in the works, opportunities on the horizon. He spoke in vague terms that sounded impressive, but said nothing of substance. I did not like him, not from the first moment. There was something in his eyes, a calculating quality that reminded me of a salesman trying to close a deal. When I asked him specific questions about his work, where his properties were located, which companies he worked with, he deflected with charm and generalities. He complimented my daughter, changed the subject, smiled. That practiced smile. After the call, I spoke with Madison privately. I asked her if she was sure about this man, if she had met his family, seen his properties, verified any of his claims. She became defensive immediately. "Dad, why do you always have to be so suspicious?" she demanded. "You do not want me to be happy. Do you?" "That is not true," I said. "I just want to make sure you are protected." She scoffed. "Protected from what?" "From a successful man who loves me." "You are a plumber, Dad. You do not understand the world I live in now." That sentence cut deeper than any knife. I had spent 26 years sacrificing everything for her, and she dismissed me as someone who did not understand. I wanted to argue to defend myself, to remind her of everything I had done, but I knew it would only push her further away. So I stayed quiet. After that conversation, Madison stopped calling almost entirely. I would send her text messages asking how she was doing, and she would respond with one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Good. The woman who used to tell me about every detail of her life had become a stranger who could barely spare me a sentence. I worried constantly. Something about Victor did not sit right with me, and I could not let it go. So I called my old friend Raymond. We had known each other since high school, back when we both worked summer jobs at the same gas station. Raymond had become a police officer after graduation and served for 30 years before retiring. He still had connections, still knew how to find information that ordinary people could not access. I asked him to look into Victor Harrington. What Raymond found confirmed my worst fears. Victor Harrington had no registered real estate company, no properties in his name, no business licenses, nothing that would indicate he was the successful investor he claimed to be. But that was not the worst of it. Raymond discovered that Victor had been sued twice in the past 5 years, both times by women he had been romantically involved with. The first woman, a 42-year-old divorcee in Phoenix, had lost $80,000 to him. She claimed he had convinced her to invest in a property deal that turned out to be completely fabricated. The second woman, a 35-year-old nurse in Denver, had lost $45,000 in a similar scheme. Both cases had been settled out of court. Victor had agreed to pay back a portion of the money in exchange for the women dropping their lawsuits. He had served no jail time, but there was more. Raymond found a criminal record. Victor had been convicted of financial fraud 7 years earlier. He had run a fake investment scheme targeting elderly people in Florida, collecting their retirement savings with promises of guaranteed returns. He served 18 months in prison before being released early for good behavior. This was the man my daughter was planning to marry. I called Madison immediately. She did not answer. I called again. No answer. I sent her a text asking her to please call me back, that it was urgent. No response. Finally, in desperation, I sent her an email with everything Raymond had found. Police reports, court documents, news articles from local papers covering his conviction. 2 days later, Madison replied. Her response was brief and devastating. She wrote that I was trying to sabotage her happiness because I could not stand to see her succeed. She wrote that Victor had explained everything, that the lawsuits were misunderstandings, that his conviction was a mistake he had paid for. She wrote that I should stop trying to control her life. The final line of her email read, "Do not contact me again." I stared at those words for a long time. My daughter, the little girl I had raised alone for 28 years, the person I had sacrificed everything for, was cutting me out of her life. For a con man. For a criminal who had made a career out of manipulating women for money. I did not know what to do. I considered driving to Columbus, showing up at her apartment, forcing her to listen to me. But I knew that would only make things worse. Madison was an adult. She had the right to make her own choices, even if those choices were terrible. All I could do was wait and hope she would eventually see the truth. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. I continued working, going through the motions of daily existence. But there was a hollowness inside me that I could not shake. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped eating properly. I would wake up in the middle of the night reaching for my phone, hoping to see a message from Madison that never came. Mrs. Eleanor noticed the change in me. She would bring over casseroles and sit with me at the kitchen table trying to get me to talk. I appreciated her kindness, but I could not bring myself to share the full extent of what was happening. I was ashamed that my daughter had chosen a stranger over me, ashamed that all my years of parenting had apparently amounted to nothing. I kept the apartment and car in my name, not out of spite, but because I knew that as long as I held those documents, Madison had some protection. If Victor tried to take everything from her, at least she would have somewhere to live and a way to get around. It was a small safety net, but it was all I could offer from a distance. I did not know then how important that decision would become. 6 months after Madison cut off contact, my body finally gave out. I was at a job site replacing a water heater in the basement of an old house on the west side of Cleveland. It was a routine job, something I had done hundreds of times before. I was crouched down, tightening a connection when the pain hit me. It started in my chest, a tightness that squeezed like a fist closing around my heart. Then to spread to my left arm, my jaw, my back. I tried to stand up, but my legs would not cooperate. I fell against the wall, gasping for breath, my vision going blurry at the edges. My coworker Carlos found me a few minutes later. He was a 45-year-old guy who had worked with me for about 3 years. Good man, reliable, always had my back on difficult jobs. When he saw me slumped against the wall, he did not hesitate. He called 911 immediately and stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. I remember bits and pieces of what followed. The paramedics loading me onto a stretcher, the sirens wailing as we sped through traffic, the fluorescent lights of the emergency room, doctors and nurses surrounding me, their voices urgent but controlled. Someone started an IV in my arm. Someone else placed an oxygen mask over my face. Then everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital room at St. Mary's in Cleveland. Dr. Nguyen, a 50-year-old cardiologist with a calm demeanor and kind eyes, explained what had happened. I had suffered a heart attack caused by a severe blockage in my coronary artery. They had performed an emergency procedure to insert a stent, a small tube that would keep the artery open and allow blood to flow to my heart. "You are lucky to be alive," Dr. Nguyen said. "If your coworker had not found you when he did, we would be having a very different conversation right now." Or no conversation at all. I spent the next 2 weeks in that hospital room. The surgery had been successful, but my body needed time to recover. I was 55 years old, and decades of overwork and stress had taken their toll. The doctor told me I would need to make significant lifestyle changes, less physical labor, more rest, better nutrition. He recommended I consider retiring from plumbing altogether. I did not tell Madison I was in the hospital. It sounds strange, I know. My daughter had cut me off, but she was still my daughter. Most fathers would have used the health scare as an excuse to reconnect. But I could not bring myself to do it. Part of it was pride. I did not want her to come back out of guilt or obligation. If she ever returned to my life, I wanted it to be because she genuinely wanted to be there. But there was another reason too. Madison had told me she was happy with Victor. And even though I knew better, even though I knew Victor was a fraud who would eventually destroy her, I did not want to ruin whatever happiness she thought she had. If she found out I was sick, she might feel obligated to come home. And then what? She would resent me for disrupting her life. She would return to Victor anyway, and the cycle would continue. So I kept quiet. I asked Mrs. Eleanor, who visited me in the hospital, to keep my condition a secret. She was reluctant, but she understood my reasoning. She was a mother herself. She knew that sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks your heart. The days in that hospital room were long and lonely. I had a lot of time to think about my life, my choices, my regrets. I thought about Diane, wondering what she would have done in my situation. She had always been the wiser one, the one who knew how to navigate complicated emotions. I wished she were there to guide me. Raymond came to visit a few times. He updated me on Victor. The news was not good. Victor was pressuring Madison to sell the apartment. He had convinced her that they could take the money and invest it in a property deal that would double their wealth within a year. Madison, blinded by love and probably desperation to prove her father wrong, was apparently going along with the plan. She thinks she owns the place, Raymond said. Victor has been telling her that once they get the money, they can move to Miami and start fresh. He has big plans, supposedly. But you and I both know those plans involve taking her money and disappearing. I nodded, unsurprised. The apartment was still in my name. Madison could not sell it without my signature. But I wondered how long it would take before she discovered that inconvenient truth. I found out sooner than I expected. It was the 5th night of my hospital stay. I had finally managed to fall asleep around midnight, drifting into a restless slumber filled with fragmented dreams. The medication they had me on made my thoughts fuzzy and disconnected. Then my phone rang. The sound jolted me awake. I fumbled for the device on the bedside table, squinting at the bright screen in the darkened room. The caller ID showed Madison's name. My heart, still recovering from surgery, began to pound. It was 2 a.m. Why would she be calling me at 2 a.m. after 6 months of silence? I answered the call. Dad, her voice came through the speaker. Cold, distant, no warmth, no concern, just business. Madison. I said, my voice hoarse from sleep. Are you okay? She ignored my question completely. I am calling to let you know something, she said. I am getting married to Victor next week. I stayed silent, waiting for more. I have sold the apartment. She continued. Got a good price for it. $150,000. And the car too. $32,000. I felt my jaw tighten, but I did not interrupt. We are moving to Miami, Madison said. Victor has a big opportunity there. So this is goodbye. Do not try to contact me. She said it all, so matter-of-factly, as if she were reading from a script, as if she were ending a business relationship rather than severing ties with her father. I lay there, in that hospital bed, tubes connected to my arm, monitors beeping softly beside me, and I listened to my daughter say goodbye. And then something unexpected happened. I did not panic. I did not beg. I did not cry. Instead, I smiled. Okay, Madison, I said calmly. But you forgot one thing. There was a pause on the other end. What do you mean? Her voice had lost some of its coldness, replaced by confusion. I handled everything. I chuckled softly. Then the chuckle grew into a full laugh. Why are you laughing? Madison demanded, irritation creeping into her tone. Dad, what is going on? I took a breath, savoring the moment. The apartment sweetheart. Whose name is on the deed? He lent him a long, heavy silence. What are you talking about? Madison finally said, her voice wavering. I never transferred the ownership to you, I explained. The apartment is still in my name, and so is the car. I was going to give them to you when you turned 30 and showed some responsibility. Looks like that is not going to happen now. More silence. Then I heard her shuffling through papers, probably searching for the documents she thought proved her ownership. That is impossible, she said, her voice rising. I signed the papers. You signed a lease agreement, I said. Not ownership papers. There is a difference, Madison. A big one. I heard voices in the background. Victor demanding to know what was happening. Madison trying to explain. Then Victor grabbed the phone. Listen here, old man. He snarled into the receiver. His charm had evaporated, replaced by raw anger. You better fix this or else. I was not intimidated. Or else what, I asked calmly. You are going to come to Ohio and threaten a man in the hospital. Good luck with that. Victor hung up without another word. I set the phone down on the bedside table and stared at the ceiling. The monitors continued their steady beeping. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse was talking to another patient. Life in the hospital went on indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. I felt many things in that moment. Sadness, certainly. My daughter had tried to sell my property without my knowledge or consent. She had chosen a con man over her own father. She had said goodbye without even asking if I was okay. But I also felt something else, relief. Because no matter how far Madison had fallen, no matter how deeply Victor had manipulated her, she could not take everything from me. The apartment was safe. The car was safe. The fruits of my labor, of my sacrifices, of my 20 years of saving and scrimping were protected. The nurse Linda came in to check my vitals a few minutes later. She was a 48-year-old woman with a gentle manner and a knowing look in her eyes. She had probably seen a lot of family drama in her years, working at the hospital. Everything okay, Mr. Wesley? She asked, noticing that I was still awake. I smiled at her. Sometimes life has a funny way of teaching lessons, I said. She raised an eyebrow, but did not press further. She just adjusted my IV, checked the monitors, and told me to get some rest. I closed my eyes, knowing that the storm was far from over. Madison and Victor would not give up easily. They would come for me for the apartment, for whatever they could get their hands on. But for the first time in months, I was not afraid. I had a shield, and I intended to use it. The aftermath of that phone call unfolded exactly as I expected. Victor, upon learning that the apartment was not actually Madison's to sell, flew into a rage. I heard about it later from Raymond, who had contacts keeping an eye on the situation. Apparently, Victor tore through Madison's apartment searching for documents that would prove she had ownership. When he found nothing but the lease agreement I had prepared years ago, his true nature finally emerged. He screamed at her, called her a liar, accused her of wasting his time. You told me you owned this place, he shouted, according to witnesses in the neighboring apartments who heard the commotion through the thin walls. You lied to me. Madison tried to defend herself. She had genuinely believed the apartment was hers. I had never explicitly told her otherwise. When she moved in after college, I simply handed her the keys and told her it was hers to live in. She assumed that meant ownership. She never asked to see. The deed never questioned why I continued to pay the mortgage from my account in Ohio. Victor did not care about explanations. He had spent 6 months cultivating Madison, investing his time and energy into what he thought would be a lucrative score. A $150,000 apartment, a $32,000 car, nearly $200,000 in assets ripe for the taking. And now in an instant, it had all slipped through his fingers. He packed his bags that very night. Madison begged him to stay. She told him she loved him, that they could figure something out, that she would talk to her father and convince him to sign over the property. But Victor was not interested in waiting around. He had other targets to pursue, other vulnerable women to manipulate. Madison had become a waste of time. "Call me when you have something worth my time," he said as he walked out the door. And just like that, he was gone. Madison tried calling him for days afterward. His phone went straight to voicemail. Then, about a week later, the number was disconnected entirely. Victor Harrington had vanished, as he always did when a scheme fell apart. But he did not leave empty-handed. When Madison finally stopped crying long enough to assess her situation, she discovered the extent of the damage. Victor had access to her credit card, a card she had given him for emergencies that she never expected him to use. He had charged $8,000 to the card before disappearing. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, purchases she could not even identify. All in her name. All her debt to pay. And there was something else. Something that hurt even more than the money. Diane's watch was gone. The watch had belonged to my wife. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned when we got married, a simple silver timepiece her grandmother had given her on her 18th birthday. Diane wore it every single day of our marriage, and when she passed, I kept it in a box on my dresser for years. I gave it to Madison on her college graduation day, telling her it was a piece of her mother she could carry with her always. Victor had taken it, probably pawned it for cash somewhere between Columbus and wherever he fled to. A family heirloom, a connection to a mother Madison never knew, reduced to pocket money for a con artist. I did not learn about any of this until later. At the time, I was still in the hospital, recovering from my surgery and preparing for discharge. Dr. Nguyen was pleased with my progress. My heart was healing well, and as long as I followed his instructions, I could expect to live a normal life. Raymond picked me up from the hospital on a gray Thursday morning. He helped me into his truck, a sturdy Chevy Silverado that he had driven for nearly 15 years, and we headed back to my house in Ohio. On the drive, he filled me in on everything his contacts had discovered about Victor and Madison. "She is in bad shape," Raymond said, his eyes on the road. "Financially, emotionally. The guy took her for everything he could get." I stared out the window at the passing farmland, processing the information. Part of me felt vindicated. I had warned Madison. I had sent her evidence of Victor's crimes. She had chosen not to listen, and now she was facing the consequences. But another part of me, the part that would always see her as the tiny baby I held in my arms 28 years ago, felt nothing but sorrow. My daughter was suffering, and despite everything she had done, I could not find joy in her pain. "What is she going to do?" I asked. Raymond shrugged. "She is still in the apartment." "Your apartment. I guess she is figuring out her next move." When I got home, I took a few days to rest and regain my strength, Mrs. Eleanor came over with soup and concern, fussing over me like I was one of her own children. I appreciated her kindness more than I could express. On the third day home, I made a decision. I called my lawyer, Mr. Brennan. He was a 62-year-old man who had handled my legal affairs for over 20 years, ever since I bought my first house. I trusted him completely. "I need you to send Madison a formal notice," I told him. "She has 30 days to either start paying rent on the apartment or vacate the premises." Mr. Brennan was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure Wesley is your daughter?" "I know exactly who she is," I replied. "And that is exactly why I am doing this." He did not argue. He understood perhaps better than anyone that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones made out of love. Letting Madison continue to live rent-free in an apartment she tried to sell from under me would teach her nothing. She needed to face consequences. She needed to understand that actions have results, that choices have prices. The letter was sent 3 days later. I did not hear from Madison directly, but Raymond kept me informed. She received the letter. She panicked. She could not afford the $1,200 a month in rent, not with her credit card debt and her regular expenses. Her salary at the marketing company was decent, but Victor had left her finances in shambles. Madison requested a leave of absence from work. She was too embarrassed to face her coworkers, many of whom had heard rumors about her situation. The office was a small world, and gossip traveled fast. The woman who had bragged about her successful investor boyfriend was now the subject of whispered conversations and pitying glances. For 2 weeks, she stayed in the apartment, barely leaving except to buy groceries. The blinds remained drawn. The lights stayed off most of the time. She was spiraling, sinking into a depression that I recognized all too well. I had felt the same way after Diane died. On the 25th day after the letter was sent, with only 5 days remaining before the deadline, something changed. I do not know what finally pushed her over the edge. Maybe it was the looming eviction. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe she finally ran out of excuses and justifications and had to confront the reality of what she had become. Whatever the reason, Madison decided to come home. She arrived on a Greyhound bus. The car I had bought her was still in my name, which meant she technically did not have the right to sell it. But more importantly, she could not bring herself to drive it. Every time she looked at that Honda Civic, she was reminded of Victor, of her failures, of the life she thought she was building that had crumbled around her. So she left the car in the apartment parking lot, bought a bus ticket with the last of her available cash, and made the 3-hour journey from Columbus to our small town in Ohio. I did not know she was coming. She did not call ahead, did not warn me. She simply showed up. I was inside the house when Mrs. Eleanor knocked on my door. Her face was a mixture of emotions I could not quite read. Surprise, concern, and something else. Judgment, perhaps. "Your daughter is here," she said. "She is standing by the front gate." I walked to the window and looked out. There she was. Madison. 28 years old, but looking much older. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled, as if she had slept in them for days. She had a small bag slung over her shoulder, containing what I assumed were the few belongings she had bothered to pack. She was not moving, just standing there, staring at the house as if she lacked the courage to take those final steps to the door. I watched her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to make her wait, to let her feel the full weight of her uncertainty. After everything she had done, after the way she had treated me, did she really deserve immediate forgiveness? But I was not that kind of person. Diane had not raised me to be cruel, even when cruelty might have been justified. So I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Mrs. Eleanor intercepted Madison before I could reach her. The older woman had always been protective of me, especially after Diane passed. She had watched me struggle for years, watched me sacrifice everything for a daughter who had apparently forgotten the meaning of gratitude. "You finally came back," as Eleanor said to Madison, her voice sharp. "Your father nearly died, you know. Did anyone tell you that I saw the color drain from Madison's face?" "What?" "He had a heart attack," Miss Eleanor continued, ignoring my attempts to signal her to stop. "Was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Surgery on his heart. And where were you, off with that criminal boyfriend of yours trying to steal his property?" Madison looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad, is that true? You were in the hospital." I walked down the porch steps, approaching her slowly. "Yes," I said simply. "It happened about 3 weeks after you stopped talking to me. Why did you not tell me?" "You said not to contact you," I reminded her. "I was respecting your wishes." Madison crumpled. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground right there on the sidewalk in front of the house. She wrapped her arms around herself and began to sob. Deep, wrenching sounds that seemed to come from somewhere far inside her. "I am sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not know you were sick. I am so sorry, Miss." Eleanor watched with crossed arms, unmoved by the display. But I could not maintain that same distance. This was my daughter, my only child, the baby I had promised to protect the day she was born. I knelt down beside her on the cold concrete. "Did he hurt you?" I asked quietly. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, he just left. When he found out about the apartment, he just left." "Good," I said. "That is all I needed to know." I stood up and extended my hand to her. "Come inside," I said. "We need to talk." Madison looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She hesitated for a moment, perhaps expecting me to withdraw the offer to tell her she was not welcome after everything she had done. But I kept my hand outstretched, steady and patient. She took it. I helped her to her feet and guided her into the house. Mrs. Eleanor followed us to the door, but stopped at the threshold. She gave me a long look, communicating something words could not express, concerned support, and a warning to be careful. Then she nodded and returned to her own home, leaving us alone. The inside of my house had not changed much over the years. The same worn furniture, the same family photos on the walls, the same smell of old wood and memories. Madison looked around, as if seeing it for the first time, taking in details she had probably ignored during her previous visits. I led her to the kitchen and put on a kettle for tea. She sat at the table, the same table where I had fed her countless meals as a child, where I had helped her with homework, where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays for nearly 3 decades. She looked small, sitting there, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. I made the tea in silence, giving us both time to collect our thoughts. Then I sat across from her and began to talk. I told her everything. About Raymond investigating Victor, about the evidence I had sent her, the lawsuits, the criminal record, about my heart attack, the surgery, the weeks of recovery, about my decision to send her the eviction notice, not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate hope that consequences might finally wake her up. And I told her about the apartment. "I never transferred ownership to you," I explained. "It was always in my name. I was going to give it to you when you turned 30, when you had proven you could be responsible. I wanted to teach you that things of value must be earned, not just given." Madison listened without interrupting. Tears continued to fall silently down her cheeks, but she did not try to stop them. She just absorbed everything I said, nodding occasionally, her shoulders slumping further with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked a question I did not expect. "Why did you not just force me to listen? Why did you not come to Columbus and drag me away from him?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the past several months pressing down on me. "Because you are an adult, Madison. I cannot live your life for you. I can warn you, I can try to protect you, but ultimately, you have to make your own choices. Even the bad ones, even the ones that hurt." "I should have listened," she whispered. "I was so stupid." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You are not stupid," I said. "You were in love. Love makes us blind sometimes, even smart people." She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be. The 7-year-old who asked me why she did not have a mommy. The teenager who hugged me so tightly on her graduation day. The young woman who promised she would make me proud. She was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the mistakes and the pain. And I realized that despite everything, I still believed in her. "What happens now?" she asked. I squeezed her hand. "Now we figure it out together." Madison moved into her old bedroom that night. The room was exactly as she had left it years ago, with posters of pop stars from her teenage years still on the walls, and books from high school still on the shelves. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking around at the remnants of her childhood before finally stepping inside. I gave her space. She needed time to process everything, and I needed time to figure out how to move forward. The anger I had felt toward her over the past months was still there, buried beneath my relief at having her home. But I knew that holding on to that anger would not help either of us. The first few days were awkward. We moved around each other carefully like strangers sharing a house. Madison spent most of her time in her room, only coming out for meals. I did not push her to talk. I simply made sure there was food on the table and let her know I was there when she was ready. Slowly, she began to emerge. She started helping around the house, small things at first, washing dishes, taking out the trash, then bigger tasks, cooking dinner, cleaning the bathroom, driving me to my follow-up appointments with Dr. Nguyen. She never complained, never asked for anything in return. She just worked as if trying to repay a debt that could never fully be repaid. We started talking more, not about Victor or the apartment or the painful events of the past year, about other things, her childhood, funny memories from her teenage years, stories about Diane that I had never shared before because they were too painful to revisit. I told her about the day her mother and I met, about the lemonade I spilled and the napkin she handed me, about the wedding under the oak tree and the first time we found out she was pregnant. Madison listened with tears in her eyes, hungry for details about a mother she had never known. One evening, about 3 weeks after she arrived, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad," she said, "do you think Mom would be disappointed in me?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Your mother loved you before you were even born," I said. "She talked to you every night when you were still in her belly, told you stories, sang you songs. She wanted more than anything to watch you grow up." I paused. "Would she be disappointed in some of the choices you made?" "Maybe, but she would never stop loving you, and neither will I." Madison broke down crying, and I held her the way I had when she was a child. Some wounds take time to heal, but at least now we were healing together. She found a job about 6 weeks after coming home. It was not glamorous. A position at a small accounting firm in town doing bookkeeping and administrative work. The pay was significantly less than what she had made in Columbus. But Madison did not complain. She showed up every day, did her work diligently, and deposited her paychecks into a savings account she opened at the local bank. I watched her change day by day. The entitlement that had poisoned her in Columbus began to fade, replaced by something more grounded. She started to understand the value of hard work, the satisfaction of earning something through effort rather than expecting it as a gift. About 2 months after Madison returned, Raymond called with news. "Victor got arrested," he said, "in Florida. Tried to pull the same scam on another woman. This time, he got caught." I felt a grim satisfaction at the information. "What happened?" "He convinced some lady to invest $120,000 in a fake property deal. But she got suspicious and contacted the police. They set up a sting operation. Caught him red-handed." I nodded, even though Raymond could not see me. "Good. What is he looking at?" 5 to 7 years, probably. He violated his parole from the earlier conviction, so they are throwing the book at him. I thanked Raymond and hung up. Then I went to find Madison. She was in the backyard pulling weeds from the garden Mrs. Eleanor had helped us plant. Her hands were dirty, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked nothing like the polished, image-conscious woman who had worked at the marketing firm in Columbus. She looked real. I told her about Victor, about his arrest, his likely prison sentence, the end of his con artist career. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply nodded and went back to pulling weeds. I expected more of a reaction. Anger, perhaps. Relief. Maybe even sadness for the man she had thought she loved. But Madison seemed to have moved past all of that. Victor was part of her history now, a chapter she had closed, and had no intention of revisiting. There was one more piece of news, though. One that I knew would mean more to her than Victor's arrest. They found some of his possessions when they searched his hotel room, I said, including a silver watch. Madison froze, her hand suspended over a weed she had been about to pull. She turned to look at me, hope and disbelief warring in her eyes. Mom's watch, she breathed. I nodded. Raymond is working on getting it back. It might take some time, but he thinks we have a good chance. For the first time since she had come home, I saw Madison smile. A real smile, not forced or polite, but genuine. She stood up, walked over to me, and wrapped her arms around my neck. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." I hugged her back, feeling something loosen in my chest. We still had a long way to go. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But in that moment, I believed we would get there. 3 months later, Diane's watch arrived in the mail. Raymond had pulled every string he could, called in every favor to make it happen. The watch was in perfect condition, not a scratch on it. Victor had probably planned to sell it, but never got around to it before his arrest. I presented it to Madison on a quiet Sunday evening. She held it in her hands, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because to her, it was. "This belongs to you," I said. "Your mother would want you to have it." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "I do not deserve this," she said. "I almost let him sell it." "But you did not," I replied. "And now you know the value of things that matter." She put the watch on her wrist and wore it every day after that. A connection to the mother she never knew, and a reminder of the mistakes she would never repeat. 6 months after Madison's return, I sat down with Mr. Brennan to discuss the apartment in Columbus. The property had been sitting empty since Madison left. I had continued paying the mortgage as I always had, but it did not make sense to maintain a place that no one was using. I had considered selling it, taking the profit, and adding it to my retirement savings. After everything that had happened, I thought I had earned the right to do that. But something stopped me. I thought about Madison, about how far she had come in the past half year. She had held down her job at the accounting firm, never missing a day, never complaining about the unglamorous work. She had saved money diligently, building up a small nest egg that she was clearly proud of. She had reconnected with old friends in town, people she had ignored during her years in Columbus. She had even started volunteering at the local library on weekends, helping kids with their homework. She was becoming the person I had always hoped she could be. So I made a decision. I told Mr. Brennan to keep the apartment. I would continue paying the mortgage until it was fully paid off. Then, and only then, would I consider transferring ownership to Madison. But there were conditions. She had to maintain her current level of responsibility for at least 2 more years. She had to continue saving money, building financial stability. And she had to understand that the apartment was not an entitlement, but a gift that could be revoked if she ever fell back into old patterns. Mr. Brennan nodded approvingly. "That is fair," he said. "More than fair, considering what happened." I signed the necessary paperwork and left his office feeling at peace with my decision. The apartment would be there waiting when Madison was truly ready for it. Around the same time, something else happened. Something I had not expected. Madison met someone. His name was Brian. He was 30 years old, an accountant at the same firm where Madison worked. He was not flashy or sophisticated. He did not drive a luxury car or wear designer clothes. He was just a regular guy, from a regular family with a steady job and a kind heart. Madison brought him to dinner one Sunday. I watched them interact, observing the way Brian looked at her. There was no calculation in his eyes, no hidden agenda, just warmth and genuine affection. After dinner, while Madison cleared the dishes, Brian approached me on the porch. "Mr. Wesley," he said, "I want you to know that I care about your daughter very much. I know she has been through a difficult time, and I do not expect you to trust me right away. But I want to earn that trust, if you will give me the chance." I studied him for a long moment. He met my gaze steadily without flinching. "Do you know about Victor?" I asked. Brian nodded. "Madison told me everything. About the money. The apartment, all of it." He paused. "She also told me about you. About how you raised her alone, how you sacrificed everything for her. I have a lot of respect for that." I felt something shift inside me. This was not Victor. This was not a con artist looking for his next mark. This was a decent young man who saw my daughter for who she really was, flaws and all, and loved her anyway. I extended my hand. "You seem like a good man, Brian," I said. "Just take care of her." He shook my hand firmly. "I will, sir. I promise." Over the following months, I watched their relationship develop. Brian was patient, understanding, never pushing Madison faster than she was ready to go. He came to dinner regularly, helped with chores around the house, and always treated me with respect. Madison blossomed under his steady presence, gaining confidence and joy that had been absent for far too long. One year after Madison came home, I stood on my front porch and watched her and Brian drive away after Sunday dinner. Mrs. Eleanor walked over from her yard, joining me in the evening light. "She seems happy," Miss Eleanor observed. "She is." I agreed. "And you? Are you happy?" "Wesley," I considered the question. A year ago, I had been lying in a hospital bed listening to my daughter say goodbye. I had thought I lost her forever. But here we were. She was home. She was healing. She had found someone who loved her the right way. "I am getting there," I said. Mrs. Eleanor smiled and patted my arm. "Diane would be proud of you," she said. "You did good." I thought about my wife, about the life we had dreamed of building together, before it was cut short. I thought about all the years I had spent raising Madison alone, the sacrifices and struggles, and small victories. And I thought about that night in the hospital, when I laughed at my daughter, because I knew something she did not. The real victory was not keeping the apartment. It was getting my daughter back. And as I watched Brian's truck disappear around the corner, Madison waving from the passenger window, I realized that sometimes the greatest gifts are not the ones we plan. They are the ones that emerge from our darkest moments, forged in pain and polished by time. I went back inside, poured myself a cup of decaf coffee, and sat down in my favorite chair. On the table beside me was a framed photograph of Diane taken on our wedding day, under the oak tree. She was smiling that beautiful smile that had captured my heart all those years ago. I picked up the frame and studied her face. "I think we did okay," I said softly. "Our little girl is going to be fine." I set the frame down and leaned back in my chair, feeling a peace I had not experienced in years. That night when Madison called to say goodbye, I laughed because I knew something she did not. But looking back now, I realized the real gift was not keeping the apartment. It was getting my daughter back. And sometimes that is worth more than any amount of money could ever buy. If you stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your time means everything to me. I have a question for you before you go. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love, even when it meant letting them face consequences you wished you could spare them from? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. If this story touched you in any way, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. To all the parents out there who have sacrificed for their children, who have loved through the hardest times, who have held on when letting go seemed easier, this story is for you. Thank you for watching. May your homes be filled with love, and may your families always find their way back to each other. Until next time.